Good afternoon. My name is Kat Fotovet. I am the Deputy Director of the Office of Global Programming here in DRL. Thank you so much for coming to our annual conference. We hope that it is productive. We hope that you get a lot out of this. And we also want to make sure that everyone gives us feedback. These conferences are very helpful to us in getting feedback from you all on what you need, what kind of information is helpful for the NGO community to hear, and whatever we can do to actually make people understand what DRL's goals and objectives are. Can I ask for a show of hands of organizations or individuals that have never worked with DRL before? Oh, great, wonderful. That's great. That's one of the reasons we do this. So I am actually going to be presenting with Karen Field, one of our grants officers from AQM, as well as Kim Gooding, who's in our Office of the Procurement Executive. So what else would be more fun than to go over grants regulations right after lunch? I mean, perfect timing. So bear with us on this. We will go over kind of the ins and outs, some of the best practices, try and give you some tips on things that we think work best in doing applications for DRL, as well as, I don't know how many people here have heard of the new super circular? Ah, okay, good. I'll let Karen and Kim go off on that. So DRL tries very hard to work directly with the organizations that are working on the ground. You are our heroes. Let me say that very loudly. You are our heroes. You are the ones that we support your work. We try to be your voice within the department. We try to make sure that the people that we are all working for together to promote human rights are the ones that actually are benefiting from our programs. So that is our primary objective. Thankfully, our wonderful grants officers are very, very considerate of being as flexible as possible within the realm of the regulations and work very closely with our implementers as well. Your success is very important to us. We do try to be as innovative as possible, to be as risky as possible. We understand that no project is ever going to be completely perfect. We recognize that changes happen. We work in the garden spots of the world, so we recognize the risks you take on. Having said that, safety and security of our implementers is paramount to us. So we want to make sure we are not one of those donors that when you're doing work in a particular area that we're looking for the lowest bid. Take care of your people. Take care of yourselves. We even consider psychosocial support. If you're working on something that is, something that individuals working in that particular area need psychosocial support, need extra support, put it in there. If you need more assistance on making sure that you're managing the federal funds correctly, put it in there. We put a lot of regulations and things. We want to make sure you can actually handle that. So if we're going to ask for you to do something, we will pay for it. So from the DRL perspective, just know as a donor, that is something that we take very seriously. And again, I can't stress to you enough the security issues. If there are aspects that you need to protect individuals, we ask on every single program that we work on to do a risk assessment. And in those risk assessments, take that very seriously. Make sure in those risk assessments you are also doing work on cybersecurity. People often don't think of that. So again, look at the gambit of what you're doing and make sure you're taking care of yourselves and your people. All right, so I will get started. So DRL has been operating on what we call the Human Rights and Democracy Fund. We've actually been working since about 1998. These funds were provided to us based upon the Human Rights Report, so to address the issues as identified in the Human Rights Report. So if anyone hasn't actually looked at our Human Rights Report yet, it just came out Wednesday, and our Assistant Secretary spoke about a lot of the issues that we were very focused on earlier this morning. And so the primary areas that DRL works on is making sure that we're respecting and protecting fundamental human rights, inclusive political processes, accountable and effective government institutions, and civil society. We make sure that we are completely building the capacity and supporting civil society. We work very much from a grassroots level. All of our programs, we look to how are they working with local organizations, how are we working from the grassroots up. We are not a development organization. That's a difference between us and other agencies. We do not do year-to-year funding. We usually fund a project depending on how long that project actually runs. So it will be the entirety of a project that we usually fund all at one time, often up to 3, maybe more years. Yes, as noted, some of the other areas that we worked on, you heard from our Deputy Assistant Secretary panels having to do with some of the regional focuses as well as the thematic focuses. Again, we are the U.S. government lead on international internet freedom, disability rights. We look a lot at freedom of expression and media, labor and business and human rights, religious freedom and anti-Semitism, transitional justice and forensics. We actually are one of the leads in the department as well on transitional justice, post-conflict issues, gender-based violence, LGBT rights, and elections and governance. We also have a plethora of emergency response programs, so various programs that can help with human rights defenders as well as gender-based violence, individuals under imminent threat, LGBT, individuals that are religious minorities. So if there are anyone that is under threat that you are aware of, please know that there is an infrastructure and organizations that we work with regularly that are able to assist. So our funding has been pretty stationary for the past few years. We, on average, get about $70 to $80 million a year appropriated directly to DRL through the Human Rights and Democracy Fund. In addition to that, we work with many of our regional colleagues, and that about doubles. So we do about $150 million a year, which roughly equates to about 100 programs per year. Right now, active programming, we have almost $500 million in programming and almost 400 programs. Again, we are working on areas where human rights and democracy are issues that we need to address, and we are not development. So again, we are working in the garden spots of the world. We are looking for innovative approaches, and we, I know $150 million might sound like a lot, but when you're talking all the global human rights issues in the world, it does not add up to a lot. So we try and be very lean and mean, very targeted. And so when we are working with implementers, we are looking for implementers that are able to really have focused approaches, make sure that they are working within the communities, working with local organizations. So we have what we call, and Karen might get into this a little more, we have what we call grants officer representatives. Those of you that have worked with DRL or with State Department might be aware of grants officer representatives or individual program officers that actually represent on behalf of the grants officers. And overall, we've probably obligated about $1 billion since 1998. And again, we have about 350 open projects. We might do a little bit of this dance.
All right, so DRL has, and this is actually very similar to how a lot of the U.S. government works in terms of its process. We have a lot of stakeholders. In this case, the Bureau itself, DRL. We have a budget staff who make sure the funds are available. You have the grants office. The grants officers for DRL actually work for a different part of the Department of State. We work for the Bureau of Administration. So we are not, we're not directly hired by DRL. They are one of our largest customers. Other stakeholders are yourselves, and then our payment system, who Tanjo is here with the payment system at lunch for discussions. There's a life cycle of all awards. The pre-award process is when we're putting out the notice of funding opportunities. If you've been in government for a while or worked with grants, it used to be the RFA, request for proposals. With the new 2 CFR 200, the acronym changed to NOFO. So you might see that we have a NOFOs out now, asking for project ideas, and then those are paneled and ultimately result in an award to whoever is chosen by the panel. Once the award is issued, we go into a post-award process. That is where the award and post-award is where the grants office starts getting more involved, and you may hear from us directly as we do the final processing and assessment of the proposal and the applicant's ability to handle the funds, and that they're not suspended and barred, and that we will be willing to issue the grant to that organization. Then you have post-award, which is also when you're actually implementing. This is where you get all to do your wonderful reports. You may get a site visit from us. You probably have more interaction with the grants process at that point. And then closeout, when we're trying to close out the money, get back any funds you didn't expend, and formally terminate that award and the relationship that we have with you for that award. The systems we have in place for that is Grant Solutions, I know some of you love it. It's near and dear to everybody's heart. PMS, the Payment Management System, our financial systems, and grants.gov is where you will find our NOFO announcements. And then you have the oversight of solicitation is we're looking at what are the priorities this year, and then you have the application process, the paneling, timeline, life cycles, and then tips. That's how the rest of this presentation will go. Priorities are you.
Hi. Hello again. All right, so again, as noted, we do not have a great deal of foreign assistance funding. So my guidance would be to look at the narratives in the Human Rights Report, country reports, those priorities, as well as things that are identified by the President, by the Secretary, and DRL specifically. We coordinate everything we do with other government agencies. So if you are getting assistance from AID, please know that AID sits on every single one of our panels, so we will be coordinating with them. We have interagency panels, and so we do ask for the opinions and input from our embassies, from other stakeholders, and so we try to make sure that we're avoiding duplicating efforts. Again, if you are submitting proposals, make sure that it's very clear how you are identifying steps that are to be taken, so we can make sure that that deconfliction occurs. Again, we try to be as fair and competitive as possible. We do almost all of our solicitations are done on this website called grants.gov. They're public, they're open. I know that a lot of people think, oh, well, I met the ambassador to blah, 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 and he said that I should get some money, and so now I'm coming and you should give me the money. That's not how it works. We literally we are not going to go around and promote fairness and anti-corruption and transparency and then not do it ourselves. So please keep in mind that we try to be as fair and open and competitive as possible. We include our acquisitions office. We include everyone that can possibly be incorporated into this process. So again, we take that very seriously. And if you have questions or there's sensitivities, again, we work in the garden spots of the world, please let us know. You can always contact us through our application process. There is an email identified in every single one. If you are not comfortable submitting through, for example, the websites, on a case-by-case basis, we can look at that. So again, thinking of your security, thinking of your sensitivities. If that comes up in your application process, please let us know. Apply early, register early, and all these horrible systems that we have, no offense to anyone, but please, please, please register early. Consistently, some of the questions and issues that pop up have to do with people applying later, or very, very late. Most of our team in DRL have actually come from the NGO community. We have all been one of you. I had my own NGO myself on the ground. So I understand when it takes a while to get everything through and uploaded, and sometimes you're working from another country, and we understand all that, we really do. But try and apply as early as possible, make sure you're registered in all the systems, and make sure that these crazy numbers, and I've been doing this for 15 years, so every year we seem to get more and more requirements. So make sure you're reading through all the technical requirements and all the systems that have to be registered. This is all you. Okay. Karen's back.
One of the things I just want to piggyback on to what Kat said is the grants office is where final technical eligibility determinations lies. When applications are submitted late, unless you have documented proof that it was a systems issue, and by that I mean open a help desk ticket. On all the systems, there's a help desk to show that you had been struggling with this problem. It was a technical problem. The help desk was working on it. If the proposal that you're trying to get in finally uploads and it says 1201, you are not technically eligible to be considered. And I have worked with organizations in the past that have lost $1 million grants because they did not apply early enough, and so by the time everything synced up, the time that the systems accepted it was 12:01, and the announcement closed at 12 a.m. So I cannot stress this enough. We get, and so many times throughout the year, we will get applicants saying, well, I had a technical issue, my password wouldn't work, this happened, that happened, and the first question I will ask is, where's your help desk ticket? Because that's my paper trail. And then I can go to the help desk and find out what was the issue, are they working on it, what did they do? The websites also tell you what hours the help desk is open. So if you decide that you're going to try to upload a document or your whole proposal after the help desk is closed, that is a choice and a risk you may run, but there's still ways that you can email in and open a help desk ticket. So please do that, because we may lose, you may have the best proposal out there, and if it came in too late, we may not be able to accept it. So these are their websites for the different systems. Again, help desk ticket, I've had multiple issues over the last 2 weeks on this. So, and then once we've gone through the whole process, we do congressional notifications. So this whole process can take quite a bit of time. We work at the speed of bureaucracy, which you should know is not fast. So don't be surprised if it takes a while for you to hear anything back. And then, so we do have, as part of the package, the NOFO, the Notice Funding Opportunities, they have supplementary proposal submission instructions. That is also something that you need to read and look at. It tells you what the criteria is that the panel will be looking at to review your proposals, and may give you some other information that you need to be aware of. If you're not familiar with the 2 CFR 200, it will tell you where to go to get familiar, because you're basically certifying that you know the regulations, you know all the strings attached to this money, which is the 2 CFR 200. So if you don't know it now, please go look at it. It's a fun document, gotta tell you. Have lots of coffee available. So the standard forms that you need to submit are the 424 and the 424B. All applications need to be in English. All budget figures need to be in dollars. And then there'll be other, on the NOFO, we'll also talk about other documents that you need to upload and submit, like risk assessments, audits that you've made done if you've had to do an A133 audit or a single F audit, timelines, key personnel. It will all be listed in the NOFO. Who's eligible to apply? I'll just take this one. Any U.S. foreign nonprofit or governmental organization. That means you do not have to be U.S.-based. We do give quite a few grants to organizations that are not based in the United States, that may be based in those wonderful garden spots that Kat has been mentioning. So local organizations are certainly eligible to apply if they have the capacity. Public international organizations like the UN, excuse me, colleges, universities, and for-profit organizations. There will be certain restrictions for for-profit, like you can't make a profit off of the grant, and certain conditions built into the grant. So tips for good proposal, that's you.
All right, so some of the tips that we have coming in for proposals, and a lot of times we always try to give feedback to individuals that do actually not pass through our panel phases. So please be responsive to what the solicitation is asking. I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but you would be amazed at how many times people come in with their great idea, but it has nothing to do with the solicitation is asking for, or they make very vague linkages. Again, think in terms of the audience that the panel is. We do an interagency panel. Not everyone is an expert on forensics. Please make sure that you are explaining things in a manner that every individual on the panel could have somebody else look at it. Take your proposal and show it to somebody else that has no idea about what you do. Make it very clear. Make sure your steps are very clear. Don't just mail it in. Don't just change it from Burma to Kenya and do the same project. So make sure the country conditions and the context is very clear, and that you actually are able to spell out the fact that you know what you're doing and have experience and are able to do so safely. We take the do no harm process very seriously. We want to make sure that people are going in there understanding the country context of what they're working on. Again, making sure that you're able to articulate the linkages between your activities and your objectives. all of our solicitations start off with what DRL's mission is. So it will say DRL's mission is to, support civil society in order to promote accountability and transparency and X, Y, and Z. Make sure that what you're proposing actually links back up to that. If it does not, that is something that is very clearly not implementing the program idea that we were looking for. Identify your stakeholders, your local partners. We consistently will say, DRL's approach is actually to work very closely with local partners, recognizing that, the safety and security of those local partners as well, making sure that you're taking all those things into consideration. And the inclusion of at-risk and marginalized populations. This is a weighted factor in our programming, making sure that you're including at-risk and marginalized populations. If you cannot, justify why not. And then again, all proposals now have to have risk assessments. And interestingly enough, even the most experienced, largest entities that we've worked with, as soon as we started requiring the risk assessments, they also learned a lot about their own organizations. They've been implementing them in some of their more local offices as well. So it's really changed kind of the entire structure on how risk assessments are utilized throughout many organizations. And then again, looking at multiplier effect, sustainability, we want to make sure whatever you're doing actually is something that will have a lasting effect on the ground. Also making sure that, when all these requirements, all these regulations, all these indicators, again, we work in the garden spots of the world. You don't want to just do financial regulations and make sure that all those things are clear and consistent just because we're asking for it. If you are working in the garden spots of the world, there are many entities that will discredit an organization and go after them for political reasons based upon the fact that they can go after them for not having adequate documentation on their finances. So keep in mind there's many methodologies and many reasons why it behooves an organization and an entity to make, beyond just because the regulations for the U.S. government are asking on that, it protects your organizations. It protects the organizations you work with. Additionally, even looking at things like indicators and monitoring and evaluation, again, we aren't just asking these things for our own purposes, although we do need them. It's not just for the bureaucratic purpose of give us numbers, give us data. But you are working in communities, and that kind of data and that information can be utilized to tell the populations that you're serving, this is what we're accomplishing here. This is why the civil society is important. So remembering, keeping that story alive and making sure that that information is utilized for your own purposes as well. DRL is very flexible in how we are able to make sure that these information and these indicators are coming to us. So again, we don't want you to work harder, it's smarter. So if there's ways that you're able to utilize monitoring evaluation information and you're already doing it ongoing, we can work with you on that so that it's not extra burdensome. So keep in mind, these are all more than just US regulations. We want this to be about capacity building for your own organization. We want you to leave having worked with DRL and leave a better organization as well. All right, so what's in a good proposal? Again, and you'll have an entire hour-long presentation on monitoring and evaluation, but make sure that there are baselines, targets, we know where you're starting from. If there's an external evaluation, you're doing something midterm and final. Final doesn't always help us, and doesn't help your organization. So think in terms of your own proposal and what is helpful to you if you need to change tack. We're looking at your institutional record and capacity, both on the ground and just in general as an organization. And then cost effectiveness. Looking at travel costs, make sure costs are reasonable. But at the same time, if you need something, if you need security coverage, if you need something, put it in there. It's not always the cheapest proposal that's going to win. It's actually the most effective proposal, the one that's thought it through. We do suggest cost sharing, again, not with U.S. government funds. You cannot cost share with U.S. government fund. Public-private partnerships are something that we actually utilize quite a bit, and we encourage quite a bit as well. So wherever you can get that extra buy-in, either locally or even internationally, we encourage that as well. So the DRL grants office as well as DRL look initially at if all the technical requirements are met. Please make sure you are submitting all the required documentation. Don't forget the budget. Make sure you go over it again. Don't forget the budget narrative. Don't forget the M&E plan. Make sure you're doing that double check. And a lot of time, and I have, again, been a grantee myself, so I know that sometimes people overlook these things, but do a double check on all of these things. Again, we have an interagency panel, and our assistant secretary is the final person that signs off on everything. And everything from the panel. And everything is pending congressional notification and approval. So there's many steps to the sausage making in this world. And I'll let you do this.
So I want to say two things about risk assessment, which is now required by the 200 CFR. Don't think that that is a reason that we wouldn't give a grant is because you've done a risk assessment. Your risk assessment informs our own risk assessment. What we're looking for is that you've actually thought it through. I did a site visit with an organization, and they're like, we want to be the less risky organization we can be. How do we do that? And I said, if you really want to be less risky, you work in the United States, you don't work with people. Otherwise, you mitigate. So think it through. We're not looking, that's not a ding. So we've kind of gone through this a little bit. We have the pre-award, we have the NOFOs, notice funding opportunities. We also do statement of interests, SOIs, which are narrow, there's like 3 pages that you submit, and then that's paneled, and based on that, we may go out for a full proposal. There is some negotiation before we get to the award site, the award that maybe the panel asks for more information, or that you get rid of something or take a different approach on something, or maybe we have less money, or in rare instances we have more money, so you may need to do a different budget. In the award system, you need to establish all of your accounts if you're new to us, payment accounts, grant solution accounts, so that you can submit all your reports on time, and it's finally awarded by the grants officer. You can go through all of this and not get an award if the grants officer makes the determination that there's an impediment to your organization getting the award, or if it doesn't come off the Hill or the Hill puts a hold on it. The grants officer's signature is the final arbitrator for this. The final determination does lie with us about giving the grant or not, or what grant terms go in if we think that we need to help mitigate risk or help give additional technical assistance. Post-award, in the award, you'll have your grants officer representative identified. They're your technical programmatic point person. Your grants officer is your admin point person. Basically, those are the only 2 people that have any authority to help you manage the grant or tell you to do something different in the grant, and ultimately it's the grants officer who will say, yes, you can change this, no, you cannot. And that's usually done by an amendment. If you get a grant and somebody says, oh, you should do this, especially like at the embassy, oh, that'd be a great idea to do this, and you go do it and you didn't circle back and you didn't get it in writing, we'll disallow the costs. And then we finally have the closeout and the financial reports. You have to keep all financial records available for 3 years after the award is closed. Not when it expires, but when you've been notified it's been closed. So every NOFO has a different deadline, so you need to make sure you're reading it and know when it closes. So I would set internally in your organizations a date before that close time. Our biggest season is October, December, where we're putting them out, and then award season is coming up. At the end of the fiscal year, we'll execute 2/3 of all of the awards in between July and September. So grants officers have no life. And then just be aware that September 30th is our drop dead date. So all awards have to be issued by September 30th of every year. So actually, it's 2016, not 17, for this fiscal year. Set up your accounts early. You need to get a DUNS number or a unique identifying number. You need to register in SAM.gov, which is the old CCR, the anti-terrorist list. That is such a wonderful system. So make sure that you're registering early and keep your registration up to date, because if you have a registration that's expired and it's September 29th, you're not going to get it reactivated in a day, and we may not be able to issue you the grant. Set up the PMS account quickly. We will obviously would give a grantee who doesn't have an account information on how to do that. And make sure that you're on top of all the reporting requirements and any other terms of the agreement, like if you have to give us subaward approvals or get prior approvals for anything, make sure you know what that is. Because it can actually affect future funding, and it can affect the grant that you're currently doing with us if you're delinquent in any of those reportings. So we're going to turn it over to Kim at AOP. We're going to do a joint Q&A. So it's not that we don't want to take your questions. We're just not going to take them now. Nice. Well, they're at least awake.
Well, good afternoon. It's just such a great opportunity to be able to present to so many new potential recipients within the Department of State. As Kat had introduced me previously, my name is Kimberly Gooding. I work for the Office of the Procurement Executive in Federal Assistance Policy, and basically that's grants policy. And just want to give you a little bit of an overview of our office, who we are, and what we do. As you can see, we're basically responsible for any policy within the Department of State, regulations, internal policies and procedures, the rules. We are the ones that develop the rules. We make sure that our grants officers and our program officers comply with the rules. So my job is to make sure that you guys know what they're supposed to be doing internally, oversight, internal controls, risk. So basically the theme of my presentation is to provide you with oversight, internal controls, risk, and identifying things that you're responsible for. Okay. I'm sure some of you guys may have heard, if not, you've heard today, about the OMB circular changes. Previously, there were multiple OMB circulars. They changed to, some people call the super circular, some may call the Omni Circular, Uniform Guidance. Basically, it's the same thing. Over the last few years, there have been many changes, and our office has been really busy making sure that we are in compliance with all the rules. Previously, as you can see, there were a number of various circulars. Within the last couple years, within the last year and a half, basically, our office has been extremely busy with updating, making sure the Department of State regulations are in compliance with OMB rules and regulations. With that said, I'm going to just talk about a little bit of what that project was about. It was to make this overburdensome responsibilities for the recipients, to make things easy for you guys to receive federal assistance. Not just within the Department of State, but within all of the federal agencies that have federal assistance authority. To strengthen accountability and just basically reorient recipients towards achieving program. We want to make sure that our recipients are producing projects with giving great thought to the actual impact of a program, evaluating, achieving those goals that you're set out to do. There are three major sections in the change. There were the A through D subparts, and then we have the reforms of the cost principles, and then we had audit requirements. Some may apply to your recipient organizations, some may not. But more so, cost principles were definitely a great improvement and strength for a person, definitely for myself, who've been doing grants management for a long time. Some other major changes, I'm not going to go into detail, but I'm going to highlight some of the changes that were really important. The circular changes came up with 99 common definitions. Some of the definitions throughout the multiple circulars combined were streamlined, some identifications for subcontracts, subrecipients. Also, it gave basically a definitive day of notice of actually putting out a notice of funding opportunity. So those were identified. Also, applying any reporting for the financial and the program reporting that recipients must do. also mentioned by Karen and Kat, you have a risk assessment. Risk assessment is required for every recipient, every federal assistance awards within the Department of State. And I'm going to go more so in detail on what that means and what that means for you. Other major changes were identifying foreign public entities and foreign organizations, giving a better identification to that. Also making sure that recipients understand that documentation to the Department of State as it applies to federal assistance should be in English and in US dollars. So those are some changes that have happened. Other major changes, fines, penalties, defense prosecutions also that's included in the new changes to the uniform guidance. And also you must, the requirement to remove foreign travel was taken out. As I mentioned to you, the cost principles. The cost principles, that's where you will find the requirements for prior written approval. Karen is the grants officer at the Department of State. So if you're submitting any changes, those changes must be submitted in writing to the grants officer or through the grants officer representative. You want to make sure that you're documenting these things. You want to make sure that the fringe benefits are included. You want to make sure that if you're talking about conferences, entertainment, those things are clearly stated in there. And if you're going to be also modifying your administrative costs, those things require prior written approval. So we also identify other activities like student activities. Those are now included, are allowable costs that may be included on your award. Limitations on relocation costs. I know a number of especially our foreign organizations, they have written into their proposals relocation costs, so those things need to be clearly identified, and that was a part of the major changes in the Omni Circular. So, I know that was a mouthful, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are like, oh my God, these rules and regulations. Imagine my office, a little small office of about 11 people, trying to make sure that the entire globe, the department's staff and grants management are in compliance, and we're updating all this information. A number of us look like this cat. And after a few cups of coffee, we remain looking like this cat. So, with the changes within the Department of State, we have updated our various instruments. We previously had what was called a fixed obligating grant. Those things have also changed to fixed amount awards within the circulars. We've modified our cooperative agreements. We also made sure that we changed and updated anything that pertains to individuals and public international organizations, because those type of entities do not have to comply with the 2 CFR 200 and 600. What did this mean for our little small office of 12? So with that, we had to codify the entire 2 CFR 200, and we had to modify and update all of our grants policy directives. We've updated those, and we compiled those into a streamlined handbook that basically sections out as the 2 CFR 200 does. We also had to modify and assist all of the departments, bureaus, and offices with all of their standard operating procedures. We're responsible for providing training to our grants officers worldwide, so we do go out to various regions throughout the world to make sure that they understand the rules and regulations as they apply to the OMB uniform guidance, as well as all the modifications that we've made within the last year and a half, 2 years to our internal policies. And one of the requirements that the OMB circular mandated that anyone within the department working with any federal assistance be trained. So as a recipient, we train you presenting at various conferences throughout the world. This is our mandate requirement from the uniform guidance. Trying to fit everything in one box. Of course, not one size fits all, and definitely within the department, we could not fit everything into one little square hole. We have a number of different federal assistance awards. We work with international agreements. We work with treaty-like agreements. We have our various cooperative agreements. We have our various different types of recipients. We have individuals. We have foreign governments. We have public international organizations. We have non-governmental organizations. So this was a big, big undertaking for our office to make sure that everyone, such as yourself, understand these rules and regulations. We talk about the various life cycles, the pre-award, award, post-award, and closeout. And all of these life cycles are very important. When we're talking about foreign assistance, we also want to talk about the risk aspect of foreign assistance and in the various life stages of the foreign assistance award. There are a number of internal controls that we must comply with, not just the recipient, but internally. We work with our various programs, program offices, bureaus, and regional offices to make sure globally that we also have internal controls and procedures. So when I'm talking about like internal controls and procedures, doing monitoring, that is definitely a responsibility of our grants officers, but we do what's called grants management reviews, where we go in and it's basically like a monitoring. We want to make sure that our posts globally, our internal bureaus within the State Department understand, and we review those records. A lot of times we would go out and we will do a file inspection where we're reviewing your award. If you have a award with the Department of State, we want to make sure that they are following those rules, they have those risk assessments plans done, and we want to make sure that our office's internal controls are actually being met. Some key points that I want to point out to you. We talked about applications. As a recipient, you will submit your 424, your standard application. This document actually binds you when you accept our funds. So you're signing this. You're basically saying that you are going to comply with all the rules and regulations. This binds you. Also, when your authorizing official accepts the notice of award, when you're signing the 1909 or the 1909I as an individual, you are accepting these requirements. So that's another point of reference where you're actually certifying that you're accepting these rules. And lastly, when you are doing your 425, your financial reports, you're also certifying. So there's 3 points where you're actually certifying that you're accepting these rules and regulations and you will comply. I'm just going to identify these examples. The first one is the financial certification. So you're accepting this financial report. You're stating in your submission to the United States government that you certified that everything in that financial report is true. When you sign, when your authorizing official sign the SF2 424, you're certifying that you are the organization that have submitted this information, the things that are stated in your executive summary, your proposal, your narrative. You're stating that all of this, the budget, this information is true. And lastly, when you actually accept the 1909, which is then your binding agreement with the United States government that you have accepted your approved budget by your grants officer, you're signing that you certify with all the rules and regulations. There have been major management challenges within the department and elsewhere, to be quite frank, for federal assistance. And a number of those are effectively managing your project or your award. So there needs to be better collaboration. If you're having challenges with your project and you know that there may possibly be a delay with getting your impact or your project measurement goals met, you want to make sure that you talk with your grants officer representative who acts in liaison with your grants officer. If there's things that need to be changed and you know that it requires pre-award or prior approval, you want to make sure that your grants officer is aware of those things. You don't want to wait to the last minute. You want to make sure that these things are communicated and you effectively coordinate this with your officials within the State Department. Also, internal control weaknesses. It's oftentimes where you know what your project is, you know how the process is done within your organization, but if you do not have any standard operating procedures, anything written down, that is an internal controls weakness. Those are things that needs to be addressed definitely internally within your organization, as well as in the Department of State. Strong controls yield better outcomes. When you can manage your projects effectively, you can have a greater impact, and those impacts show in the outcome data that you present to the organization. That's what makes the program office want to work with you again. You have provided very good data, you've done your project, and you can show that you produce great outcome information. So you want to make sure that you have a strong control on what your internal organizations are doing. Therefore, they will yield the best outcomes that you are wanting to see. Risk. We talked about risk. Risk is very important. Why? Because risk is one of those things that have been codified in 2 CFR 200 and 600. It is a requirement that every federal assistance award, it doesn't matter how big or how small, every federal assistance award must be assessed for risk. And I just want to go over a few things that you can do as you are looking at your risk at your project level. So you want to make sure that you're looking at the qualitative data as well as the quantitative data. You want to make sure that you're having realistic outcomes, that they are smart, specific, measurable, effective, you can evaluate it, and they're going to yield the results that you want for your project to yield. You want to make sure that you mitigate any issue. You want to communicate with your program office and your grants officers on anything that will be adverse or risky to your project. We want to hear those things. In your personal life, especially in tax season, you notice today is normally the tax day, tax return, but now it's Monday. You want to make sure that you keep documentation. Documentation is key. If you don't have any documentation, that means that things never happen. But when you're doing your risk assessment, of course, if you're doing your taxes, you're going to keep copies of your last year's taxes. You're going to make sure that you have evidence, receipts of things that you are putting in on your tax return, and you're going to make sure that you comply, that you're going to get your tax return in on time by close of business today? Monday. It's actually not close of business, but by midnight, you're going to have your tax return. So those are things that you need to comply with, as well as submitting your proposal or your application to the Department of State. If they said that your application needs to be in by 12 midnight, those are things that you need to comply with. As well as controls within your business aspect. You want to keep records of property. You want to track those things. If you're not tracking them, and if something gets stolen, how are you going to provide evidence that these things were stolen? And especially if it was something on your that you cited in your proposal and we funded. So those are types of risks that you want to keep in mind. Defining project risks. There's a probability or likelihood that something may happen if you are working in an organization and let's say the authorized official who has signed the award and accepting the award and the payments, you want to make sure that that person is not putting it in an unlocked safe. There's a probability or a likelihood if the safe is unlocked and the funds are to be used for your project that something may happen. So you want to make sure that you avoid situations like that. Impact. Within the State Department, we measure your risk by various levels: high, moderate, and low. Internally within your organizations, you should also do the same thing, especially if you're working with a subrecipient. You want to make sure that your subrecipients understand that they are accepting the federal assistance funds on behalf of you and that they are the most less risky individuals or organizations that you want to work with. There should be an appropriate balance. Make sure that you mitigate any risk that you may see. If there's any adverse situations that can possibly be a risk to the Department of State, that you identify those things internally. Lack of internal controls is definitely a weakness, and we want to make sure that you understand that there are requirements for standard operating procedures. We talked about DUNS. Of course, DUNS is a requirement, and you should not have to pay for a DUNS. You should not have to pay for DUNS to be processed, a unique identifying number, which is the same thing as a DUNS. You want to make sure that you apply for those DUNS numbers early, and that is the same. Make sure that all the information is the same if you were to apply for another award within the government. And also, some organizations, especially not the new ones, but some of the old organizations seem to feel that the requirement for DUNS is a new thing under the circulars. No, the requirement for DUNS numbers have been around since 2006. Okay, we talked about recipient reports. In those recipient reports, you want to make sure that you have that impact data. You want to make sure that you're tying it to the priorities that was stated in the objective of your proposal. And of course, if you need to submit your financial reports, make sure you do that in a timely fashion. There's a few more slides I'm not going to cover because we've already talked about them, but there's a few things that I want to identify. This is a biggie. So, misuse of funds. Of course, everyone has to be monitored and evaluated. The Department of State has been evaluated and monitored by our internal investigation, internal IG, as well as GAO on a regular basis. And as a result of those evaluations, there have been a number of things that have been identified. We want to make sure that your organizations are not one of those because, of course, if there's any misuse of public funds, you do run the risk of going to jail. You do run the risk of going to jail. So that's one of the things I want to highlight. Having effective management systems will help you prevent all those things. Your accounting systems will help you identify any challenges that you may have, but definitely as a recipient of the United States government, you do have to comply with all the laws, rules, and regulations. So I'm going to skip over some of the slides, and I'm sure you're going to have some questions and also have the opportunity to have the slide, they're going to be able to have the presentation. Yes. Right. Okay. So if you are one of those organizations that are cited, we would definitely would not want to have you listed on the debarred, suspension, or in jail organization. So we wanted to just make sure that you comply with those things and you know the rules and regulations. And of course, the grants officer, the program officer, and the office of the procurement executive is here to make sure that we assist with anything. And that's all.
We did want to open it up for questions as well. So if anybody has any questions, please. And can we turn the lights on? Sorry. Hi, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Nikki. I'm with War Child Canada. You mentioned a couple times an interagency committee for reviewing the proposals. I'm wondering if you can mention just who else is on that committee and a little bit more about the process that they go through, if it's sort of individual and they provide recommendations, if they meet as a group. I know what the sort of weighting criteria is, but more the process that they go through for that.
Sure. The interagency panel, it depends where there might be possible duplication. So, for example, on some of our labor programs, we might also work with the Department of Labor, HHS, or USAID. So it depends on where the potential stakeholders are. But we do try to make sure that where there is the potentiality for any overlap, that we are including those stakeholders in the review panel. That includes also other offices within the State Department. Again, if it's, for example, a forced labor program, we might be working with the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. If it's someplace that is more humanitarian in nature, our program would be geared towards, let's say, former released political prisoners. We might be also working with our populations, refugees, and migration. It depends on the proposal itself and where that overlap might be. There are some accountability programs, forensics programs that we might also be working with our International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Bureau as well. So it depends, but we try to make sure our Office of Global Women's Issues as well sits on panels that have to do with any kind of gender programming. So it does depend, but we try to make sure the relevant offices and bureaus and agencies are included. Yeah, go ahead.
My question was about the risk assessment that's required now. I'm wondering if you can give some general guidance about how much depth to go into in the proposal, because I could see, you know, when you start naming risks, you could get down to a really detailed level. So if you have a good general rule of how long it should be or how deep we should go with the risks that we assess.
We do have a suggested template up, but risks, liability-wise, it's not for us to determine per project what your risks would be. So it really depends on the program. It depends on your organization. It depends on the country. So as extensive as you need to be in order to assure both the panel and yourselves that you have looked at the areas of possible concern. Again, we're worried about the safety of the individuals working on the program as well as the safety of the populations you're working with. So as deep as you need to get into to make sure that that's very clear.
Thanks.
Anyone else? You all look like that crazy cat now. That we hope we haven't scared you too much from wanting to apply for our program.
It's the post-lunch.
I actually just had a point of clarification as a follow-up. In the guidelines, they actually only allow 1 page for the risk assessment, but then there are 3 pages for additional. Can you use those additional 3 pages? So you might have up to 4 pages for your risk assessment if it's necessary.
Right, if it's necessary.
Okay.
It's usually at least 1 to 4 pages. If you have additional ones, we're not going to ding you on that or kick your proposal.
Okay, yeah, our risk management group is asking for extra pages. So
yeah, no,
great.
We've had really
Thank
long,
you.
and that's actually helpful. Sorry.
I have 2 questions. I'm from the Church of the Brethren, and we had been in humanitarian relief back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, but been out of the game for a couple of decades. We're getting back into it now with Nigeria and Haiti especially. But My question has to do with, we're registered in SAM and many of the other places, but we did register as a private voluntary organization. I haven't really heard you mention what the role of that list is and if you use it or if that gives any additional credence to an organization. We were just added in January, for example, as a new PVO.
Well, you have to be registered, and what we're looking for is that it doesn't say excluded, that you haven't been suspended and debarred or
Right.
have terrorist lists. So to be eligible to get a grant, you do have to be registered and keep that registration active. So it is something we consult just to make sure that the organization has an active registration and that the status is green, essentially.
So do I understand your answer to be, to get a State Department grant, you have to be registered?
To be
And
get
approved
a
as a
U.S.
current-
government grant, you
as a
have to be
PBO.
registered and be in good standing.
Okay, I understand that part.
Yeah.
But what about that PVO list that's on the State Department website?
So the PVO list is something actually that's mainly maintained by USAID. We do check that as well, but it's not a requirement to be listed on the PVO list. Regarding organizations we work with, depending on the country conditions, registration with foreign governments is not necessarily something that we look at. So just noting that. And on the PVO list, it doesn't give credence either for or against. Certainly, if AID has done a review of an individual organization on the PVO list, we will look at whether or not there's any kind of consistent compliance issues or anything like that.
Okay.
But registration with PVO is neither helpful nor hurtful.
So I had a second question. Do you have any first-time grant awards programs for organizations like us who are getting back in the game after a couple of decades of being out of the game? But do you have any new first-time awards type programs or opportunities?
Sure. Again, it depends with what the proposal says, what kind of experience on the ground maybe the partners have that they're working with. Maybe they bring some kind of certain expertise to a field or to a country that they're also working with organizations on the ground that understand the country conditions. But again, it depends on the context of the program and the context of how you're working through that. Because we do look at the capacity of the organizations, both within the context of what they're working in and their experience and their expertise.
But there isn't a specific program set up that you would get additional, special assistance necessarily. A good way to start, if you're not sure, is to try to build your own networks and become a subrecipient
Right.
with an experienced prime. And we've seen that in several iterations where a subrecipient has kind of graduated to prime time, but they get the technical assistance that they need from an experienced prime to build their capacity. As you should be well aware of since you're in this room, there are lots of regulations and strings attached to our money. It's U.S. federal taxpayers' money. We take that very seriously. So you do want to make sure that you are doing it right. And if you feel like you need assistance to do that, maybe becoming a sub initially to get your feet wet before you take a prime role is a way to go.
Yeah, I agree.
Go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for the overview and the cat pictures. My question was about our planning, potential grantees planning process, being able to anticipate the kinds of NOFOs that are coming out. It's very helpful to see you have the priorities in the Human Rights Report and the season. I know USAID has recently started doing the quarterly business forecasts with a call as well as an Excel spreadsheet of things they are planning to release. Is that something that DRL might consider doing or you've thought of?
One of the differences between ourselves and our development partners is that we respond to, or are often in our programs are responding to real-time situations as they're happening or as issues come up. So we are very flexible in that nature. But I would say if you were looking for a forecast, the Human Rights Report would probably be your best indicator of where that was going. As far as planning our programming, we tend to get our funding out rather quickly and comparatively to other agencies. So we do a lot of planning, but it's in a much shorter amount of time. as far as putting something out in the context of something more development focused, because that's longer term, probably not in the immediate, but we can look into other ways of making sure that we're informing organizations.
I don't know if you've been aware of the circular, but what the circular encourages is a 60-day window for NOFOs now. So DRL has been trying to do the 45 to 60 days. There may be some instances where we need to do less because of a situation that we need to respond to more quickly. So there is a move to try to give organizations more time to develop programming ideas. So I would say if you haven't already set up an account on grants.gov and put in your filters to get notifications as soon as things are issued, that would be a good step. And you can look at, you can build a tracker of your own as you monitor it over a year or so to see when are things coming out, where are you seeing trends. And there are trends that we do similar things, or I see similar things come over my desk, and then I see something really different because we have a different political priority. We have an election this year. We have no idea what political priorities a new administration will come in at. So,
and I think we only have time for like one more question.
Hi.
I think we have two questions. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
My name is Lou. I'm from Cuba, and I have two questions. The low or high risk influence the award that you give to a project, and the other one is there is a sample of a budget online. I never did one. I need one. I need to see one.
So your risk assessment of your determining if the risk of your program exceeding being able to achieve its goals or things that are happening in the country, that doesn't have any bearing on the panel process or being chosen to be given a award. What it tells us is that you've thought about it and you've identified things that you perhaps can mitigate, but there are things that you don't know is going to happen. Did we know there was going to be a tsunami? Did we know that there was going to be an Arab Spring? I didn't know. So it's a matter of making sure that it's an optic for us so that you've thought these things through. Now, in the grants world, there is a determination of high risk for a grantee where the grants officer has decided or determined that the grantee may have some administrative concerns or is not as strong administratively as they need to be. If that was ever determined, the grants officer would build in additional reporting requirements in the grant agreement if it was determined to issue the grant. So the high-risk definition in the grant world has a different tone for a grants officer, but you would be well aware if we were going to go that route. It has become a standard operating procedure for DRL AQM to do kickoff calls around new grantees for sure, and around some new programs where within a certain period of time after a grant has been executed and signed by both parties, that we'll set up a phone call or an in-person meeting depending on where that grantee is, and really substantively talk about both programmatic and administrative issues that we see that we can try to help mitigate at the beginning. In terms of budgets, I don't think you've got a template up, do you?
We do. From this entire conversation, on DRL's website, we actually have proposal submission instruction, and those include templates on there. And
right.
it's an entire, I think we have 8 pages of proposal submission instructions kind of walking you through all these steps. So please take a look at that. It also includes an M&E primer, which will go through how to do an M&E plan, exactly what we're looking for. So we try to make sure that all that information is out there for you, and it's on our website.
But on the budgets, you need to also make sure you have a budget narrative that explains what's going on. So a budget narrative that tells me staff time is for staff time, really? Truly? Versus this person needs to be on this grant 80% of the time because they're going to do this. At the end of the fiscal year, I said we executed a huge amount of grants in a very short amount of time. You really need to, for our benefit, so you don't get 5 emails back with questions again and again and again, do budget notes for dummies, because we are reading things very fast and assessing budgets for reasonableness and allowability and allocability very fast. So the more information you give us about your process, your logic model behind your budget, the better. And believe it or not, I have seen many a budget that actually doesn't add up. 2 plus 2 apparently doesn't equal 4 all the time, according to some people. So proofing your budget, always a good option, so that, you know, if I actually have a budget that adds up to what I think it should add up, and the formulas actually add up to what you've told me. And proof, even if you're using Excel, proof it, because if you've set it up and there's a fatal error someplace, or it's rounding in a weird way, we're just going to send it back and have you redo it.
Okay, so we are well over our time, actually, and I see Mr. Dennis Vega is here. If anyone has any additional questions, myself and Karen and Kim are going to be here for a little longer. We're happy to talk to you about that. We hope we haven't totally petrified you from applying to DRL programs. No, we do take it very seriously that we are working with you. Again, we want to develop your capacity. We love partnering with you. You really are our heroes. I can't say enough how wonderful it is to work with all of the people doing the amazing human rights work on the ground. And thank you for doing it. I don't think we thank you enough. So from the bottom of my heart, I really, really want to say how much DRL appreciates all your amazing work.
Thank you.